just what our dream is of the future of this peace movement, and recognizing that to have that conversation, the different perspectives and especially the different points of involvement need to be brought to the center of this conversation. And so to have this intergenerational conversation really gives us the opportunity to have some creative and innovative dreaming of what the future of the peace movement would look like. And so we are honored to have a few great people with us today that really have been in the trenches of this movement for a while, and will be able to hopefully share some insight from their experiences, and also be able to think of some creative ways that we can move forward as a movement that is intergenerational. I'm going to introduce our three panelists, and then I think each of them have about a 10-minute reflection that they're going to start us off with, but I'm going to open us up with the bios that they shared with me. So I'm going to start with Beatrice Parwatikar. Beatrice is a pastoral minister trained and residing in St. Louis, Missouri. She has an educational passion for ecofeminism and continues to be guided and receive spiritual direction from the Benedictine monks of St. Mary and St. Louis Abbey. Beatrice is co-chair of the Jubilee USA Board, which is an organization working on international debt and tax transparency. Beatrice also previously served on the Pax Christi USA National Council and was a founding member of the Pax Christi USA Anti-Racism Team. Beatrice now serves as a Pax Christi USA Ambassador of Peace and has represented Pax Christi USA both domestically and internationally. So we're really grateful to have her with us this morning. Next, I want to introduce Judy Coode, who works with Pax Christi International as the project coordinator of the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative. Judy first became involved with Pax Christi in the early 1990s when she joined the Pax Christi Youth Forum. She served on the Pax Christi Metro DC Council for many years and on the Pax Christi USA National Council from 2004 to 2010, which I think it's good to know that 3 of those years she was the chair of the council. She also has worked with the Mary Knoll Office for Global Concerns for 20 years before joining the staff at Pax Christi International in 2016. Judy is a native of Nashville, Tennessee, a graduate of Loyola University of New Orleans, and a former Jesuit volunteer who served in Anchorage, Alaska. And she has lived in Washington, DC for the past 31 years. Thanks, Judy. And last, but certainly not least, we have Jeff Sved with us today. Jeff was commissioned as a Franciscan lay missioner through the Franciscan Mission Service in 2012, living and serving in Bolivia for 4 years. While there, he spent most of his time in prisons, working and learning alongside talented carpenters, leather workers, and artisans in the prison workshops, as well as integrating restorative practices through Las Escuelas de Perdón y Reconciliación. Jeff currently works with Catholic Mobilizing Network as the organization's development manager and was recently elected to the Pax Christi USA National Council. Jeff has lived in an intentional Franciscan community for most of his adult life and is committed to a simple lifestyle and working for social change. As you can hear from those bios, we certainly have an esteemed group of folks with us today, and so I'm excited to hear their opening reflections and also be able to have a little bit of this conversation with them, like we said, of this creative dreaming process with some folks that have been in this movement for quite some time. So I think we can go ahead and start off with those opening reflections. Beatrice, would you be comfortable starting us off?
I guess this is age before beauty, Judy. I want to greet you from St. Louis, Missouri, and also from the land that was owned and belonged to the Osage, the Miami, the Sioux, and the Iroquois. Now, you must realize that they are also 6 nations. So the Iroquois are 6 nations, so they had a whole cover of areas. So if you saw them out, they may be other natives that would say they belong from this area, and they would. I would say that mostly I started out as a teenager in the civil rights movement and continued, and I've ebbed and spurred based on things of life, children to take care of. working, but always doing something, whether it's not anything more than serving a meal or making a meal for the poor or low income, or working on, when I was in Vermont, I've just moved back to St. Louis, I was working there with migrant workers and stuff when they started coming to the dairy farms. The thing that I find most important in the continuation of working in peace is, and that's what I get a lot when I'm with young, how do you continue? And the continuation is sometimes you have to step back and take care of yourself through prayer, through whatever you need, and take less. Also, practicing something that Abbot Luke of the Benedictines calls humility. And humility is knowing who you are and your talents. So you are able to say, I can do that. And if you can't, you can say, I can't do that, but I know someone who can. And that is the thing that you bring to the table, your ability. Always, I'll say for me, having a basis of continual growth within yourself, within your prayer life, in your spirituality. Prayer life to me is extremely important to strengthen me on the journey. The other thing that I find extremely important is understanding that things change in the way that they do work. Now, for instance, I led a sit-in when I was 16. We had to use public telephones because there was no such thing as a cell phone. So you had someone assigned with money to run into the telephoning that was needed to be done. But you need to be able to update yourself. You need to be able to join in with others. My spiritual father is a person who used to say, never, he died, he was almost 100. He said, never live with everybody the same age, because you need to find out what is going on. So my working with people who are younger or college students is not that I am the person in the know and they are not. I work with them on the same level because they have things to bring to the table that I don't know. But I have things to bring to the table that maybe they don't know. But one of the things I always tell them, and this is a lesson that I learned the hard way, don't burn bridges. I was a bridge burner. And then it is terrible. You have no way to go back. So always leave a situation or deal with a person in a way with respect. And I guess the biggest thing I will say is I have learned over the course of years, the only way to solve things is through nonviolence, and not because that's a wonderful spiritual thing. No, it doesn't leave enemies. It doesn't leave people on the battlefield who want to come back and get you. So even if you solve a problem through nonviolence and the other person didn't get their way, they haven't been destroyed. So you can work with them again. And that's the reason I am committed to a nonviolent way of solutions for problems in the world. And also remembering always to try to share and be and give whatever I can with whoever I'm with. I will go on, let Judy go, or whoever's going next.
Thanks, Beatrice. Yeah, that was beautiful to hear. And I am just really commend you for all of the involvement that you've had, starting out as a teenager in the civil rights movement, especially leading that sit-in as a 16-year-old. I mean, that's incredibly admirable. And I'm really grateful that you could be with us and share your opening reflection. And I'm sure we'll have so many more questions for you later on. But I will now pass it to Judy or Jeff, whichever of you feels called to go next.
Jeff, I'll go ahead and go, if that's okay. Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, everybody. So I guess I'm just going to give I'll try to tell the story of how I got involved with Pax Christi. So I'm born and raised Catholic from a very large family. I'm the youngest of 9 siblings, and very, very Catholic identified, Catholic schools. Both of my mother and my father both volunteered in their way. My mother was with the Ladies of Charity, and my father was in the Knights of Columbus and did volunteer work through that. So I was raised with a sense of service, that was a part of your faith. And but it wasn't until I went to Loyola in New Orleans that the Jesuits sort of taught me more about social justice, and I started to I heard for the first time about Catholic social teaching, and that resonated quite a bit with me. And I spent a year, as Lauren mentioned, I was with the Jesuit volunteers for a year. I had never heard of Pax Christi. So this was, I graduated from college in 1989 and moved to Alaska to do my Jesuit volunteer year. And the first time I heard of Pax Christi was from one of my housemates. Now, somebody who's on this call who might know, was there a Pax Christi USA conference in the Pacific Northwest in '89? Marie's nodding her head, yes. So one of my housemates went to that conference, and he did that right before he joined our community. And he told us all that he had gone to this Pax Christi conference, and that's literally the first time I'd ever heard of Pax Christi. I didn't even know it existed. So when I moved to Washington, D.C. in 1990, I came here to, I spent a year with Sojourners as an intern. And I think I heard a little bit more of Pax Christi. I knew that it existed, but it wasn't until about a couple of years after that, a year after me, after my Sojourners intern year, the next year there was a guy named Eric Hartice, who some of you know, and he was a Sojourners intern, and he and his girlfriend at the time, now wife, Allison, they went to the Pax Christi USA assembly in Seton Hall, I think. And I guess, I don't know if that was 92, 90. It was 90, Marie, are you saying 94? Anyway, it was the early 90s. It was the early 90s. And they came, I was good friends with them, and they came back from that trip, and they said that they were like, Johnny, were you there? Were you at the Seton Hall? Okay. Well, that was the birth of the young adult forum, because I think that there were like 10 people under 40 or something, and they found each other and decided that they needed to invigorate a youth component to Pax Christi. And so Eric and Allison came back to Washington, D.C. and said that they and the others who, the other young people, had decided to network together and build the young adult forum. And so they invited me into the Pax Christi Young Adult Forum. And there were a handful of us here in Washington. I don't know, sometimes our group got to like 15 or 20, sometimes it varied in size. And we met together on a monthly basis and just prayed together. And sometimes we would discuss if there was some activity happening. DC, of course, is chock full of witness. You know, there's every week you can go to a demonstration. And we would talk together about what was going on, how we wanted to be involved, how Pax Christi could engage. And we started to go to the national conferences, and that's how I met Johnny and a whole bunch of other young people who were involved. And it was great. So we had several years. Well, I stayed involved with the Young Adult Forum. Well, I think I removed myself sometime in my late 30s, because then it just felt sort of ridiculous. You know, I was a little too old. I aged myself out. And I think the last one I went to was when we were in Harlem. Was that 2001 or 2002? 2002. And I think that was my last young adult gathering. But it was very formational for me. It was meant the world to me to have met all these people who are around my age from across the country. And we were all equally engaged with our faith, and we were engaged with the issues, and we wanted to work together. And the Pax Christi USA, the general population who were tended to be older, I felt welcomed. And I felt that we were able to weave into the community, and it meant the world to me. And that's how I stayed involved. It always felt very comfortable, safe space, good space. And I learned from lots of people who have had amazing experiences and who have depth and a thoughtfulness that's part of the whole cycle, right? We're supposed to pass on our wisdom. And so I received a tremendous amount of wisdom and made some very dear friends and learned a lot about myself and about peacemaking. And for instance, getting to know Bea when we served together on the National Council, which was a wonderful experience. And I learned, I don't know if she's going to tell you all this. I don't know what she's wearing right now, but it was probably a gift from someone, because every time Bea travels anywhere, people give her things. I've never known anyone who gets things more than Bea Parwatikar. So I think I'm going to stop talking and I'll let Jeff jump in.
Thank you so much, Judy. That was great to hear. And it's fun to hear about how that young adult forum really came up organically through this, just like a casual gathering of folks. Yeah, so thanks, Jeff. I think you are going to be the last person to share your opening reflection, and we're excited to hear that. So take it away.
Thank you, Lauren. And it really is fitting that I'm following both Beatrice and Judy, because that's what we're talking about here, right? How to listen to leaders in the movement, and as younger people, follow, absorb the lessons already learned, and follow in the footsteps of great leaders in this movement. As part of an opening reflection, I wanted to share one story after my time in Bolivia. In between Bolivia and moving to Washington, D.C., I spent a couple of years in campus ministry at a small Franciscan university. And one of the opportunities that came up, I took a few students one evening to a small group panel discussion titled "The Lessons Learned from My Peacemaking Grandparents," or Our Peacemaking Grandparents. It was Arun Gandhi, Martha Hennessy, and Kate Hennessy sharing about what they had learned growing up around Gandhi and Dorothy Day. It was for me an opportunity to invite a new generation into a conversation that's been going on for generations. It was an opportunity for a group of students in their 18, 19-year-olds to start learning about peacemaking. And for us all to be able to absorb there's one particular story that Arun Gandhi shared about some of the coloring activities that Gandhi had asked him to do to help him better understand his emotions as a 6 and 7-year-old, and to reflect on the lessons that my grandparents had instilled on me, other wise elders that I've looked up to, the lessons that I've learned from them, and to really invite a new generation and to be sharing those reflections with a younger group of students. When I was in college, I had the opportunity to be exposed to great leaders in the movement, and was grateful to have the opportunity to start passing that on in my own role in campus ministry. And so I think for our conversation today, there is a question of how we as younger people take the time to listen, take the time to learn from people who have been in the movement for a lot longer, who have shaped the movement for generations, and to listen and learn, but also to insert ourselves in the spaces where we can be, to make a space for ourselves at the table, and to ask for a space at the table to be part of those conversations. So I'm excited to be part of this conversation today, and excited to see where this conversation will go. And so I think that's what I'll share for an opening reflection, and excited to continue the conversation with Judy and Beatrice.
Thank you, Jeff. And thanks for all of you sharing your opening statements. I think before we jump into this like Q&A portion, I just want to share that if anybody has questions that come up as we go along, feel free to send them in the chat. And we have about an hour to go through these questions, so feel free to send them in as they come up. But one question I think that I want to start with, and I know some of you touched on in your reflection potentially, but to get to this point where we're able to pass on the work of peace building, I think everybody needs to have some moment of either transformation or encounter with the peace movement. So I'm curious if any of you have like one moment in particular that you can point to as your moment of transformation or encounter. Or if not, I think that's okay too. But if there is a moment in particular, I think Beatrice just raised your hand potentially.
I remember that, as I said, you're 16, and of course you know everything and know nothing. And this was at the height, we were trying to support the students in the South who were at the Woolworks. So we were going to Woolworks, and the idea was to go to the headquarters of Woolworks, which was their main Woolworks across from Macy's. And we had been told that by other people in the movement, the Black movement at that time in Harlem and in New York City, that we were too militant. We were not doing anything militant. I didn't want you to understand. We were just, but they thought we were too militant. We were taking and doing too much. And they were making sure to say that they were separated from us, because they didn't want it to appear that they were this socialist militant group. And Martin Luther King was coming to speak at Ebenezer Baptist Church. And of course, a 16-year-old who thinks she knows everything, we go with other people, we're all going there, and we're waiting to hear him denounce us because that's what the people wanted him to do. And he said, anyone who operates in peace and is for the movement was good. And he would not condemn us. He said, as long as they're operating in peace, as long as they're functioning, and at that moment, I knew that this man does not get political. I mean, I had, just read some things about him, seen him on, but he was not political. He was there as a person of peace, true peace, and understanding that maybe everyone does not practice peace in the same way. I mean, we weren't violent, we were just, carrying signs, we were being forceful, we were going back and forth, or every week we were making, and because the media or politicians were saying things about us they didn't like, people wanted to back away from us, but he wouldn't. And I will never forget that moment. And I always realized that I may not do peace in the same way somebody else, but I will back people and support them and help them. That was a transforming moment for me. And always to remember to set back that you are not supposed to have a strict thing of what you think is peace or what you think how people should do. So I would say for that, it's transforming. And by the way, Judy, yes, this was given to me from the women of Hawaii.
So I guess I'll go next, and I'm not sure I can name like some light bulb thing. I mean, I guess I can just share the first time I was felt compelled to do a public witness or public action. when I was in college, I went to Loyola New Orleans, and so I don't remember, it was my junior or senior year, and there was a demonstration in Baton Rouge about the death penalty. And so a group of us, campus ministry organized a group. There were only enough of us to fit in a van, and we drove to Baton Rouge and participated in this procession. And so that was my very first demonstration. So, and it was, you know, I have a very fond memory of that. And that evening I talked to my father on because at that point you had to go to the payphone at the bottom of the dorm, and I would call my parents collect to talk to them. And I'm on the phone with my father, and I told him what I had done, that I had gone to Baton Rouge and done this anti-death penalty, been part of this anti-death penalty demonstration. And he said, why? And so it sort of speaks to, like, Beatrice was talking about, you can't judge what's right for other people. And I'm like, you know what, that it worked for me, and I had to do it. I had to do it for me. And even, I think what he meant was, it was pointless politically, that it's not going to make any difference to the Louisiana legislature if 100 people are in the street in Baton Rouge. Who cares? And I thought, well, that really actually wasn't, I mean, ideally, yes, we want the Louisiana legislature to change their minds, but I had to do it for myself, to put myself out there and express my position on this. And that was the best way I could do it. So I guess that's my story for that.
Thanks, Judy.
I'm not sure I have one specific story that speaks to that kind of intro or transformation, but I guess there is one decision that opened a whole lot of doors. Choosing community, choosing to consistently be exposed to people in the trenches, choosing to gather around a table on a nightly basis or on a weekly basis with people from all across the different social justice movements. I remember when I was in Cochabamba, the missioner community, there was a few dozen of us across Maryknoll, Franciscans, Mennonites, all with long histories of working for social change. And that transformation within me happened over time, of individual conversations, one after another, of learning from these wise figures, people that had been, I spent pretty much every Wednesday for a few years, I was selling in the market with a religious sister that had been in Danbury for 6 months, getting to hear those stories, like choosing community, choosing to be around people that have been doing this work for so long. That for me has been kind of the transformational moment.
Thanks, Jeff. And I think that brings up the next question that I was already thinking of, but very much so you like pinpointed it. Each of your encounters and stories really spoke to the power of community. Like, not one of these encounters would have happened alone if it was just an individual person, but it very much so is this collective action. So I'm wondering if any of you would be able to speak to the role of community in movement building that we are dreaming of doing today.
It's critical. I mean, it doesn't work without community. There's the people who try to do it by themselves. It doesn't last. I mean, maybe they might spark for a second, but there's no sustainability. So
I would say doing it without community is, first of all, exhausting. And second of all, you learn so much, and a community brings so many talents that one person cannot bring alone. And just when, for me, community is when I'm like, oh, okay, I've had this, I've had enough, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I can't do another step, I can't do another thing. someone will come along and say, hey, here's a glass of water and let's sit down and talk about this and move on and look at it. Or out of the community, someone else will come from a community that you're speaking to that mobilizes you again. I feel as if also in that community, speaking to what you need a community of prayer. You need a community that prays with you. You need a community that you can go to. And you need a community, for me, I'm just saying for me, I need a community I can be honest with, I can talk to and trust, because it is a long journey. It is a long journey. And I agree with you, Judy. When you meet that person who is just fabulous and they're out there all by themselves, you turn around 3 years or 2 years later and they're gone because they burn out. That is the key thing, creating community and being in community, I believe, maybe I'm wrong, prevents you from burning out and just dying of exhaustion. And it's the community that feeds, it's the community that teaches, and that's the reason for me, my community is all ages and all sizes and all races and all sexes and whatever, because that community teaches me so many things and brings me to such life. And I hope I bring this life to them.
Yeah. I think I just offer that it's impossible to do this without community. And a gospel reading a few weeks ago had Jesus sending the disciples off 2 by 2 by 2. One of Francis's wisest decisions was he sent off the original lesser brothers in pairs as well. We're conditioned to do this not as individuals, but in community, both for the support that we need for ourselves. The community supports us, but it also allows for the movement itself to be sustained longer term. That's how new people are able to enter in and learn as they set forth on their journey within the movement.
Thank you all. And Beatrice, I really appreciated your insight, I guess, on sustaining the movement. And I know you talked about it during your opening reflection, but it's like that caring for yourself. I think community very much so does that, and we care for our community. So that sustainable piece of it also, I think I just appreciate that you touched on it. Another question that I wanted to ask, since we're all coming to this from different generations, different points of entry into Pax Christi, and really just peacemaking in general, is there a particular, I guess, legacy from a previous generation that you were really able to either appreciate or like that caught your attention when you joined? Or I guess on the contrary, is there any legacy that you hope to leave to other younger generations as they are entering the peace movement?
I came in with solid training early on, because in the beginning we were trained very much in how to maintain ourselves in crowds, or when people were against you and this type of thing. But one of the things that I feel that I have also learned, and that is something I learned from the civil rights movement, everything that I am doing today, I am standing on other people's shoulders. Whether or not it was the official civil rights movement, whether it was women sitting around the table, it was an interesting thing. In the Black churches, they always empowered their children and women and the men in the church, because society did not give you a place to be empowered. So Oprah will talk about this, where she talks about that, she was in church and they would say, oh, that girl can talk, so let her talk, and that's the kind of thing that you must learn. And empowering, that is one of the things that I bring to community, is that I understand that if I see somebody with a certain talent, I'm going to speak to that talent and let them demonstrate it and use it. But one of the most important things I think I've learned is dealing with people who are completely opposite of me. When I first started working out of the Human Rights Office in St. Louis Archdiocese, all of our congressmen, except maybe one, but all of our senators were extremely conservative. And everybody would say, oh, I'm not going to bother to go. They're not going to listen to anything we have to say. And I would go and visit them. John Ashcroft was conservative and very religious and evangelical. He was Pentecostal. And he would say, you would say, well, you know, I'd like to have the people have food and this, and he would say, oh, well, they're not working and they don't deserve this, and you know. And so I started approaching him this way. I would say, John, I know that the Holy Spirit said this to you, but the Holy Spirit, when I prayed, said this to me. And I would tell him my agenda. Now, this was very funny. He respected that because he understood that the Holy Spirit does speak differently to people. And him and I became very, very good friends. No, he did not change his mind and do things I wanted, but there came a time when a young woman was having problems with her immigration. John was Attorney General of the United States at this time. I contacted his office. He changed everything in a day. They told her that they weren't even going to let her come to the office in a month. She had less than 2 weeks, she had a green card. Because he did it on the friend, because he took that if I believed in this woman, it must be true. So the point is learning. One of the things we have to learn sometime on our very peace movement life is that we do have to engage with the people on the other side and find out what they believe that you can feed into and respect. I believe that I could feed into that the Holy Spirit. And it was true. I was saying to him, I understand the Holy Spirit is saying this to you, but the Holy Spirit is saying this to me. One of the other congressmen, he said to me once, he said, oh, I'm finally so happy to be able to do something with you that you like. And he did it for me. And he stood by it and he did this type of, so one of the things we have to find is going into rooms and places where people are not in agreement with us. We must find places that we can talk and make dialogue. Dialogue is extremely important. And I think we have forgotten this. I'm not saying people here, but I think this is the problem we're seeing right now. There isn't dialogue and respect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think both of those are really true. And knowing that that's uncomfortable for all of us, but the value of it. I think I was just talking about something similar with a few folks a couple of days ago, but even just thinking of the impact of COVID on us and the ability to have these conversations with folks that aren't necessarily in your sphere in general, it is just pushing us a little bit deeper into those echo chambers that I think are already pretty easy to find ourselves in. But like you said, the power of that conversation really can't be amplified enough. That's really crucial.
I think so. Lauren, just to respond, you were asking, like, I think what we might have picked up from another generation, or
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the basic, which I think is pretty universal for people who are involved with any multi-generational movement, is that obviously what we realize is that the generation that precedes us almost always has gone through whatever the challenges is that we've gone through. So just to always be open to their wisdom, because even if some of the small details might be a little different, the overall gist is the same. And somebody else has already gone through this interpersonal conflict or strategic conflict, and they can have advice to give. I just want to say, for me, I've already asked Marie for advice, but so Marie and I our offices were across, we were about 6 feet apart from each other for a long, long time, including all the years that I was on the Pax Christi USA National Council. So honestly, anything that came up with the National Council, I'd like walk across the hall to Marie and like, what do we do about this? And she would say, well, when we had to go through that, when I was like, this is what you do. So I've always felt very grateful. Marie and I have been connected for many years, and I have completely depended on her wisdom. And there are, other folks in the DC area, speaking of Pax Christi, there's a very strong Pax Christi presence in Washington, DC that I have benefited from tremendously, and from the wisdom that's been shared. So.
Thanks, Judy. Jeff, would you like to add anything to that question?
I think one of the legacies or generations that shaped me actually was outside the U.S. Being in Bolivia during Evo Morales' presidency, ignoring, I guess, a bit of the current reality with the coup in the last couple of years. Like, we'll take that aside, but being in Bolivia during the presidency of the first indigenous leader in Latin America, the first elected official. And looking at, being part of that community, that culture, in a time where a lot of the indigenous wisdom was finally being respected. There really was quite a segregated, before that, there was quite a segregation of anyone with Spanish descent lived, or European descent lived in the cities, and anyone with indigenous roots was out in the campo. And for the first time, the voices from the campo of the indigenous wisdom was being centered and brought into the cities, and brought into leadership. And just seeing firsthand the wisdom that was finally being amplified and present there. Had always been there, just never listened to, and trying to bring some of that approach back to the States.
Thanks, everyone. We have one question from the chat that I want to start out with. And I think, it really is a central question to how we keep this movement alive and vital, and energized also. So the question that I want to read is, what are some of the practices, either with community or alone, that you panelists do to help when you feel like you're entering that burnout stage or nearing burnout?
Again, my thing is stepping back, joining in prayer, caring for myself. Sometimes it's important, is something as simple as making sure that you're eating properly, taking care of your physical health. And then, like Judy talked about, if you have a Marie in your life, find that person and talk to them. I was fortunate, as I said, it isn't just a minor thing with those monks. I have all of them at my disposal. And now when I moved back to St. Louis, they were all going, oh, we're so excited you're coming back. And my daughter goes, oh, they don't remember you, do they? But of course, it's a freedom. I mean, that is a place which sounds funny. I can go sit in a man's monastery and I can be who I am. If I'm broken, if I'm angry, if I'm falling apart, I can be that person. And someone or two of them will sit down and they'll say, well, maybe we should have some tea. And one of the young ones might go make tea. And we all sit down because they have made, as a family, a commitment to me. And I, like a family, have committed to them. So they will call me with their needs. They will call me with things they want to talk about. I will call them. But I think you need to find that place, that person, or whoever it is. And maybe I feel this way, but I don't think you can do it without prayer, without communion, without, attending church, and without being in, again, community when you're this way. You need to be able to have that community, even if you're working with them, to be able to be honest. Because if you're not with a community that you can be honest with and say, I'm broken today, or I'm broken this week, or I'm exhausted, because it's kind of like, I joke that sometime I feel I need to get that t-shirt that says, I can't believe I'm still working on these same old things. Yeah, it's just a new version of the stuff I've been working. I mean, it's meeting up with a friend who says to me, I can't believe we did all that work in civil rights all those years ago. And now, we need Black Lives Matter, and we need it. I mean, and we're still doing this. Or I can't believe that we did all that marching against nuclear weapons and it's still here. So the key thing is you do need community. You do need prayer. You do need to take care of yourself. And a lot of people who are on the journey for peace think, oh, the best thing I can do is just not do anything for myself. No, you do need to do for yourself. You do need to eat. You do need to care for yourself, because you will injure yourself and you will be broken.
I'll jump in, Jeff, okay. So I guess for me, very similar to what Beatrice said, I agree. It's community. You have to have people you can talk to. I have a couple of people who know the particulars, who will be open to you sort of unloading what you need to unload. Of course, that's that has to be equal, because you should be available for them when they need it. But I do have a couple of friends who are not in the movement. And sometimes it's good to just spend time with people who are not also hardcore, movement people, just to step back. Honestly, I cross stitch and I find that incredibly stress relieving for me. It's not stress relieving for other people, but it's stress relieving for me. So that's a completely different, just hands art that just sort of gets you out of the intellectual space or emotional space. And then just to get some perspective, I love history. I love historical books. I love history podcasts. And I swear to God, you start listening to podcasts about the Tudors or the whatever, and gives you some perspective. Like, things have been crazy for a long time. And it's part of the human condition. I think that we are evolving. It's baby steps. The moment that we're in is really we're just in a split second of the human experience. And it doesn't feel like things are moving very fast, but we are, it's a long process. So just have friends sort of outside the movement, have some sort of craft or something you can do that takes you out of your headspace, and a couple of people who will listen to you unload.
I'll echo community, and those personal self-care practices are definitely so important. With the formation program for Franciscan Mission Service, it's a 3-month preparation ahead of cross-cultural experiences. And I was so confused during that 3-month period of why we spent so much time on self-care. Fast forward a few months and I was wishing we had spent more. It's so integral to personal, to sustaining yourself in whatever field. I would say I'm not good at it. I used to be a runner and hurt my knee and have since lost my primary form for self-care, and trying to figure out what that new best practice is for me. And that's on an individual state. I will continue to echo what Beatrice was saying about community being so important. And also a grounding in that there aren't going to be immediate solutions. Like, we are in this for the long haul, which particularly for my generation, I think is very hard to understand. Having grown up in a fast food culture, now everything, if it can't ship to you within 2 days, it's not worth getting. We don't have that kind of long-term perspective that allows us to really invest our time sustainably in a movement that's going to still take generations more.
Yeah, and I think that like self-care and sustaining your soul is something that society in general, I feel like, is just so fast-paced that it's not encouraged in a natural way. I think it's the Audre Lorde quote about how self-care is a like radical act of political warfare, because it is just counterculture to sustain your soul in that capacity. Thanks all. The next question is actually going to come from a member of our Young Adult Caucus who submitted it. So I'm going to invite Creed to unmute himself and ask his question.
Thanks, Lauren. Beatrice, you mentioned at the beginning this powerful story about how there was a lot of untruth and misinformation flying around about your movement, and how Dr. King, refused to stand against you in that situation. And I think that is troubling and really resonates with people in the young adult movement today, because there is so much misinformation and untruth flying around on social media and in the news, specifically about these sorts of topics. And so I was just wondering if you could speak to the strategies that you have used throughout the years to combat the lies that are told about the work that we do.
First of all, you deal in your truth and you be secure in your truth. And trying to constantly combat or fight against someone saying anything against you waste your time and pulls you down into the mud and the murk. And I'll tell you something else. Just imagine putting some weights on your clothes, because that's what they do. They weigh you down. Every step becomes harder and harder to make. So what you need to do is the humility to know what you're doing is your truth, and you continue that truth no matter what. And unless there is someone, and you, again, in the community that you're working in, if you are living that truth with that community, that's what you go with. Now, if these are people, I guess if you looked around and they were all devil worshipers, you might be in the wrong community. But other than that, no. But if you're in a community that people are saying you feel as if it's the right community, you're not doing the wrong thing. The key thing that will keep you moving is that you feel you're in the right community with that movement. It's sometimes hard because you may have people who are very close to you who disagree with you. Let's think of the election that just happened. I had that because I lived in a small town in Vermont, and I had friends who, after the election, got bigger Trump signs and moved them forward. And I was thinking, what am I going to do? Because one of these people I'm very close to, I didn't go up and say, hey, why are you moving that Trump sign? And why no, I just went on with what I was and being true to who I was and what I do, and let her do whatever she wanted to do. And I must say, I was worried when I got ready to move from Vermont, how we were going to say goodbye. And her goodbye to me was, you were there at my lowest points. You have been there at my best points. You have been with me through everything, and I will miss you truly. Now, this is a woman that in all respects is complete opposite of me. You know, I mean, her and her husband buy guns and all sorts of things I don't even care about. But what I'm saying is, be true to who you are, stay in that truth, and work it against that community that you have designated as your community. And if you have an outside, like Judy was talking about, outside people that you know or advisors, talk to them to make sure that you haven't slipped off the trail. And remember, I would say, remember that God says his spirit will keep you on the right trail and on the right road. And you pray that you stay on that road and you do not fall off. I believe me, that is so important, because sometimes I have gone around some crazy routes and it is the right way I was supposed to go. So trust in God, trust in your deep beliefs, trust in that community that you have created, and trust in this outside community, because Judy is right. You need an outside community outside of, and that's what the Benedictine community is for me. They're outside of the peace movement. But find that center and trust yourself and trust God within you. Remember, as one of the saints says, when you open your heart and your heart is filled with the Spirit, you are holding within your heart God the Father, God Jesus, and God the Spirit. You hold the entire essence of God within you. So that's what you need to remember when you're going forward. I don't know if that answers your question.
Amen. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. The next person that has a question that they submitted, which also, if you want to ask a question, feel free to either send it in the chat or private message me. And for a small enough group, it's nice that people can unmute and ask their question. But Madeline Labriola had a question, so I'm going to turn it over to her.
Thanks, Lauren. I've been struggling with this, and I'm sure other local groups. I've been a big local group person. Sometimes we'll get young people to come to a meeting, either through a friend, or maybe we did some kind of a demonstration and they signed up. Anyway, they'll come once, maybe twice, but to really engage young people when a group has been formed, like for instance, our Pax Christi Rhode Island group is about 12 people and we're all around the same age, a few younger, maybe in their late 50s. But do young people need a separate group from, or can they be integrated? We try to make them feel welcome. And so that's our struggle, is how do we keep young people engaged in the work if they do come to something? And where I live in Rhode Island, I'm not close to, I'm about 45 minutes from Providence. There's like 4 nice colleges in Providence. And there are peace groups even in those colleges. But I don't know, that's like, we still struggle to figure out how to engage and keep young people in local groups, I guess. And should they be separate to them? We try to give them a separate venue. So anybody have any ideas on that?
I know myself, I've had problems as a woman and a Black woman coming to groups. And a lot of times the problem is that the group, even though they're saying they're welcoming you, they are not willing to accept you or do any changes. They, they continue to want to run the meeting exactly as they run it, even if someone comes in, not necessarily myself, but if someone comes in with a better idea. You really need to be able to integrate and let them be a part of the group and really make changes and be a part of the group. I don't know, Judy, and would you like to speak to that, or am I wrong?
Well, so for me, my initial experience with Pax Christi was in the young adult forum. And and that made a big difference. I mean, the first few years I was involved with Pax Christi, I was just involved with the young adult group here in DC. And by the time our group sort of faded and people had moved away, and well, I was already full of Pax Christi. Like I couldn't get it out of my system, so I was already in. And then I was a grown up or something. I don't know. I started going to the grown up meetings. So I would say, actually, Madeline, yeah, I do think that young adults need a space for themselves to talk to each other. And it might be a unique person. There might be a young adult who would go to a group where they are, a generation or 2 generations younger than the others. And that might be a space that works for them, but you're not going to know who that person is until they show up. But I would say in general, yeah, that young people probably, to really get it set in their system, they need their own space.
I'd offer one thing just outside of the Pax Christi context of when there are really active groups of whatever on a college campus, and students are asked to then transition after they graduate into a really active local group. There often is just such a disconnect between what was happening in the college age group and what is happening in the real adult group. And so whatever bridges can be made between for that transition from a college group into the local chapter, I think is really helpful, because you'll see people that are really active in a college level group and go to one meeting of a local chapter of whatever, and step aside because it isn't speaking to them in the same way that the college group did. So I think that gap in the 23, 24 age range, as people transition into a local chapter, has a lot of potential. That's what I've seen in other areas, and that might be something that's transitionable to Pax Christi.
I would say, I guess the advantage we had of living near Middlebury College in Vermont was that it was a small area. So every group worked together. So we, the college students expected that we would come in on their campus and they would invite you in to be part of their groups. And when we were planning something outside, they were part of our group. So it was never, it was identifying the people who were going to do what you liked, and who were with you. And that was the kind of thing, because I think, of course, something like migrant justice, Black Lives Matter, marching against the children at the border for the bill, all of this was done totally intergenerational. And they were planning, even if the students are planning, there were times they were planning and they were calling on people out in the outside communities to be part of on-campus events. So that's what I'm saying. If you make room for everybody to feel that their gifts will be accepted, I guess that's what I'm saying. Because it's ideal what Judy was saying, but that isn't always possible.
Thanks, everyone. Our next question is going to come from Bob Shine, who is one of the co-chairs of the Young Adult Caucus. So I will pass it over to you, Bob, to ask your question.
Thanks, Lauren. I guess my question is a little bit about despair. In the sense, Jeff, I think you mentioned, committing to stuff with a long-term perspective. And I think I spent much of my 20s learning patience, that the movement takes time, that we are just sowing seeds. But where I find myself at an impasse now is with climate change, that we don't have time. We have a very small window for which we can make decisive action. And if we don't act and we don't get what we need, inevitable things happen. So I guess I don't know if there are past moments in history that have had this sense of urgency or despair or difficulty. But that's where I have a lot of hope when it comes to a lot of our causes, that these can be long-term things. I mean, my day job is working to change the Catholic Church, so I'm a centuries thinker, except for climate change.
I think you're still going to have to go to do everything you can, maybe in a more urgent way. I mean, because I agree with you. I mean, it's like I keep going. You know, Bill McKinnon was a friend in Middlebury, 350.org, and it was just he is so calm. That's what, after the big meeting, I said to him, well, Bill, how are you? Because I thought he'd be crying. And Bill will walk in and he's so calm and he's so hopeful and he's hugging everybody and he's just happy. And I think part of what you have to do is do your best again and say, when that moment comes, I was there. I did my best. That's all you can do. I mean, you can, and the other thing you can't do is to be angry at other people for not moving, because there are people who are just never going to want to give up their stuff or give up certain things. But I think you have to go forward. I'm with you. I'm, we're out there, we're working. And because I keep coming back to the land that we're on is given to us, the native saying, is loaned to us by our children and grandchildren. So we should be honoring that so that they can have it. And my other thing is, I keep thinking so much, if you think of the Psalms, so many of the Psalms is nature praising God. Well, how is nature going to continue to praise God in its natural way, in the way that it's supposed to, if we all destroy it? I mean, it's sadness, but if you just get down and be sad, no one will be out there speaking for it. You got the words. You've got the feeling for it. So continue your work. All of us need to continue, and we need to get behind you and join you. I'm sorry, that's not an answer for you. I know. I'm not answering you. I realize that. I'm sorry.
No.
Forgive me.
I think that was a great answer, B. I mean, I do think, Bob, I hear you, Bob, and I think this is a moment of both. And I mean, we have to do both. We have to always maintain that long vision and not get bogged down in because, dude, I'm working for nonviolence. I mean, if that's not, come on, that's going to take forever. So I feel you on your day job. But you're right too, is that the crisis with the climate is a unique new crisis for all of us. So it's going to require a different response. So we have to do both. That's my Weasley answer.
Tough question. I don't have much more to add, other than to continue to emphasize the importance of self-care, even in the urgent moments. Yes, there's an urgency around climate change, and we still need to be around tomorrow and the next day to continue fighting. So yeah, there's a little bit of a different trajectory with with climate change than there is with the nonviolence movement. But both require us to be able to wake up the next day and continue fighting.
The interesting thing is the environment, it's not a separate. We're doing violence to the earth. We're doing violence to creation. We are practicing violence. We're practicing violence by cutting off life for our children and our grandchildren. We are doing violence. And I say we because all of us have, me, I'm going to speak for me. I've lived maybe a little bit taking too much, but I feel as if I agree, it is an urgency, and I don't know how, because I'm looking at particularly people in the United States, I don't know how we're going to get these people to give up their toys and give up their things to see this urgency. We can't even get them to take their shots. We can't get people to respect others with vaccine. So I don't know. I mean, I wish I had a fabulous answer other than, like I said, you need to still bring the voice to that. We still need to bring the urgency to that. And I watch that young girl all the time, and she's there and she's urgent and she's pathetic and she's prophetic, and we're all in awe of her. But they bring her to every meeting because they want to say they had her at the meeting. But are they making any real changes? That's the whole thing. A lot of the changes that you are talking about that need to be made, yes, some are individual. We can all stop eating meat. We can all do certain things. We can all cut down. We can change the way we do. But some of the main things need to be done on a larger scale. And that's the problem. We don't have political will at this moment, which we need and should have to do that.
I'm glad you brought up Greta Thunberg,
Yeah.
because she really has, that's a great example of learning from a younger, we always think that we're only going to learn from older people.
Right.
And she's a great example of a younger person who has taught all of us a great deal. I have to say, I mean, maybe it's too incremental and it's frustrating, but she has really inspired the Friday school strikes.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. I mean, it seems like it's really international. It's around the world, our young people who have responded to her. So, wow, what a gift she's been, and her bravery, her courage, and her creativity. And I'm glad, B, also that you've linked that the issue of care for creation and nonviolence, that we have to have a nonviolent response, and that to best care for creation, we have to be nonviolent. So I'm just going to do a little plug. I don't know how many folks know, the Vatican is instituting this Laudato Si platform, this 7-year plan. And so Marie and several others from Pax Christi are participating in working groups that are implementing this platform and really trying to promote the connection with nonviolence and all of the ways that this Laudato Si platform is being brought to life. So we're trying.
Thank you all. I think we have maybe time for one more question, since this is on Zoom and we have the hard cutoff of 2 p.m. Eastern time that everybody automatically gets sent out of here. We cannot go on beyond that at all. But there was one other question in the chat that I wanted to hopefully get to for at least a bit. But the question is, can you speak to working within an institution or situation where you feel you are always pushing and in the minority perspective trying to bring about change versus leaving a place where everyone is in a more similar evolving perspective? Basically, then the question is, do you push for change within the institution or give up and leave?
Oh, man,
You need
Listen,
that
I
voice.
cannot tell you how many times I've had this conversation in the past few, the past few years, but really, I think I've had this conversation with three different people in the past 5 days. So, yeah, I do think, boy, is it really challenging, and you have to find your allies. And I mean, the phrase, of course, is, if we're speaking about the Catholic Church, what we all keep telling ourselves is we're the church, and we have to keep reminding ourselves that we're the church and live into that. Bea was talking earlier about owning your truth, like you're knowing yourself, and so for those of us who are trying to change the church, we keep telling ourselves that, like, we're the church. Just a little anecdote, about not feeling heard or not, this also relates to the importance. Bea was also talking about just dialogue and getting to know people personally, and changing hearts. If you can keep up a dialogue. I'm going to bring up Marie again, and myself and a few others have met with representatives at the Vatican in Rome. Like, we've had the chance to get to know staff people at the dicastery for promoting integral human development. And this is just for instance. We had a meeting. We had a conference in 2019. So Marie and I had gone for a pre-meeting with some staff people, and a very small meeting. It was like 5 of us sitting around a table, and we were talking about this conference on nonviolence. And oh, can you hear me now? Okay, sorry. And we brought up one of the things that we wanted to put on the table at our conference was the violence of colonialism, and that the church needs to admit to the violence of colonialism. And I, we sort of put it out there, like, well, actually, we need to talk about that. The church needs to talk about colonialism and the violence of it. And God bless him, this one dicastery staff person, who's a lovely guy, who's Italian, he's like, what? He had no idea what we were talking about, but we had the opportunity to talk to him. And I think that if we can know people and sit across the table and have personal time, and they trust us, and it might take some time. There's been some whittling along of the movement. If you get to know people, you trust them, you see them as a person, and you come into the conversation with humility and openness, and that's how things get changed. It might take way slower than we want, but we try.
It is getting to know. As I said, I lived in Vermont. I lived in a town of 1,200 people, and I probably was the only person of color in the town until we got migrant workers working in the dairy farms. And I was there 23 years. And it was people looking at me and getting to know who I was, and getting to know that I was there for the good of everyone. I wasn't just there for myself. And you do have to be able to, it's hard to sit and be that person, but I'm going to give you an example. When that moment becomes difficult, think of being a woman who's sitting in the room of engineering, or think of a Black person sitting in the room where everybody is white. There are many people, by the presence of their life, are always the only person in the room that is always different, and having to deal with it. I know that's hard, and it is hard, and it is wearing, and is what we were talking about, microaggression last night. But you have to understand, when you stay, it is a good thing to do, and it will take time, and you will need to let see those people not as enemies, but as a person with a different view on the other side. But being truthful and being yourself is the most important thing.
Thank you. Jeff, would you like to add anything to that question? And then I think we're going to move into just a few final remarks.
For the sake of time, I think we can jump to
Perfect.
final.
That sounds good. So we have about 3 minutes. So if each of you has anything that you want to add here, we have time for about 1 minute per person. But before we do that, I just want to say thank you again to all of you for serving on this panel. It's been really great to hear from all of you and really hear this prophetic wisdom that you've shared about your role within this movement and your hopes for it in the future also. But we can do final remarks before a round of applause, and I'll invite everybody to unmute themselves.
Just briefly, I'm just grateful for all of the people who have paved the way for us. And I'm so heartened by the fact that there continue to be young people who are moved by Pax Christi and who want to continue the work. So thank you. Thank you very much, Lauren, Jeff, and Bea.
Jeff?
This has been a wonderful opportunity to speak with you all. Thank you, Judy and Beatrice, for all of your wisdom and sharing. And I think I would just emphasize how important it was to hear Olga and Roxana as kind of the moderator and keynote last night. In moving towards an intergenerational perspective, to have representation from younger voices front and center. To be a younger person, listen to the two of them last night was quite important for me.
I guess I would hope that some way we would continue to encourage young people to come into Pax Christi. As someone who worked with and still does a class with the students at Middlebury College, nothing gives me more excitement and enjoyment than working with them. And I'm always moved and energized when I'm with them. And it was so funny, you know, I'll talk to someone and you realize how young they are. They're 19 and she'll say, I worked on something for 3 months and it didn't come about. And what am I to do? I feel terrible. I worked so hard. And then I have to explain to her how we have long-term things. But I hope we find a way to make a space and pull in more Pax Christi youth and young people, because the movement is important.
Beautiful note to end it with, I think. Thank you all so much. If anybody attending wants to unmute and share a quick word of gratitude or a round of applause, I invite you to. Otherwise, I think we are about to get sent out of these breakout rooms very quickly and into a 30-minute break. Thank you all so dearly.